So this video lesson is all about multiplying and dividing with negative numbers. Now, in many ways, the process for multiplying and dividing is significantly easier than the processes for addition and subtraction. But like those other operations that we've talked about, we're going to start this one going all the way back to the beginning and thinking, what is multiplication? We're going to start the video looking just at multiplication, and then we'll extend into division because the division rules are exactly the same as the multiplication rules. So pause the video, spend 15 to 30 seconds brainstorming for yourself what exactly is multiplication, and when you're ready to come back and see some ideas, unpause the video and we'll move on. So one of the things that you might have thought about when it comes to multiplication is many copies of the same group. Like many of the things that when we first learn about the operations in elementary school, the way that we think about it is specific to positive numbers. Creating copies of the same group really only works when you have a group to copy. You know, you can't really copy a group of -5 things. On the same token, you can't really copy something -5 times. So as long as we have positive numbers, many copies of the same group works. Another way that you've probably seen multiplication in the past is the number of objects in an array. You have some columns, you have some rows, and to count up the number of objects in that array, you just multiply the number of columns by the number of rows. Here we have 48 because we have 8 columns and 6 rows. But in order to talk about multiplication when it comes to negative numbers, we have to look at it the third way, which is actually how multiplication is defined in math, which is repeated addition. So when it comes to repeated addition, that's saying something like 3 times 5 would be 3 copies of the number 5 added together. So 5 plus 5 plus 5. We can use that to talk about what it means to multiply a positive by a negative. For example, if all of these ones represented negative values, money that you actually owed to somebody, we could call this 4 times -1. And in that case, 4 -1s would be the same as -1 plus -1 plus -1 plus -1. In this case, we know how to add negative numbers together. That many -1s put all together is -4. Significantly, 4 times 1 is 4, but with that -1 there, it becomes a negative. Let's take a look at another example and see if that same pattern holds true. We'll go back to that example of 3 times 5 that we talked about, but let's call it 3 times -5 now, and see if that pattern still holds. Well, this is 3 copies of -5, so -5 plus -5 plus -5. -5 and -5 together are 10. Add the third -5 in there. -10 plus -5 is -15. Significantly, 3 times 5 is 15. But because the 5 is negative, we end up with -15. So far what we've seen is that if you have a positive number times a negative number, you end up with a negative product. That is actually just the product of the two numbers together with a negative sign attached. It gets a little bit more complicated when we get to a negative number times a negative number. Now there are two things that we could get for this. We might think that it's either 15 or it's -15. Now I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video here for somewhere between 45 seconds and a minute. Work through this on your own. See if you can figure out why it's either 15 or -15. And then we'll come back when you're ready to move on. So there's a few different ways that we can think about this. Well, we know that 3 times -5 is -15. If that's the case, we shouldn't have 3 times -5 be the same as -3 times -5. These two numbers are opposites, which means their product should be opposites of each other. That's one way to look at it. We have 3 and a -3 that are opposites. They're both multiplied by -5, so our products should be opposites. Another way we can think about it using the opposite mentality is that this -5 can be thought of as the opposite of 5. This -3, that sign can be thought of as the opposite of 3. And the opposite of an opposite is just the thing itself. So the opposite of a positive number is a positive number. The opposite of a negative number is a positive number, and we can do that using factors. Because we know, or we can think about the fact that Negative 5 is the same as negative 1 times 5. We don't always think about it that way, but that's what it is, negative 1 times 5. Now, since multiplication is associative, we can take this 5 times negative 3, and that's something we know what that is. 5 times negative 3 is negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. Add all those together and you get negative 15. Well, negative 1 times negative 15 is just the opposite of negative 15, or 15 itself. So two negative numbers multiplied together is a positive, but a negative and a positive multiplied together gives you a negative. And that's really where the rules for multiplying and dividing with negative numbers come from. Two positive numbers, your answer is positive. A positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, and your answer is negative. And two negatives, your answer is positive. Or, and you don't have to pause this and write this down unless you already did, or the way you can think about it is, if the signs are the same, two positives or two negatives, your product or quotient is positive. If the signs are different, the product or quotient is negative. Now, we only talked about multiplication, but because multiplication and division work in the kinds of fact families that they do, their rules turn out to be exactly the same. Same signs, product or quotient is positive. Different signs, product or quotient is negative. That's where you may have heard the expression before, two negatives make a positive. That only works for multiplication and division. So if you haven't already, go ahead, pause the video, write down these two rules for multiplying and dividing integers, and come back when you're ready to do some practice problems. So as far as multiplying and dividing are concerned, all we do is we do the operation that we see. If it's multiplication, we multiply the absolute values. If it's division, we divide the absolute values, and then we apply the sign rule. Same signs positive, different signs negative. So go ahead, pause the video, work on these 4 practice problems here. That's 4 different multiplications that you can do using various combinations of positive and negative versions of 12 and 15. Pause the video, go through those multiplication problems, and come back when you're ready to see the answer. So I'm going to actually start the explanation up in the upper right-hand corner here, where we have 2 positive numbers. 15 times 12 is 180. And we're going to use that as our basis, because in each of the other problems that we see, we have a version of 15 multiplied by a version of 12. So in every case, our answer is going to be some variation of 180. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we have a positive times a negative, which is either 15 copies of negative 12 added together, or 15 times 12 is 180. Different signs gives us a negative answer. Similarly, down in the bottom left, we have a negative 15 and a positive 12 instead of a 15 and a negative 12. That's a negative and a positive multiplied together. That gives us a negative answer. Now, down in the bottom right, we have a negative 15 times a negative 12. That's going to give us a positive answer. And part of how you can look at that is we start with our original problem. We take 2 opposites. The opposite of an opposite is the thing itself. It's a regular positive 180. Now, another set of problems for you to do, this one all based on division. Different combinations of positives and negative numbers. So go ahead, pause the video, work these divisions out. Again, just divide the numbers you see and then apply the sign rules at the end. Come back when you are ready to see the answers. So in the upper left-hand corner, 121 divided by 11 is 11, but it's a positive divided by a negative. Those are different signs, so the answer is negative. In the bottom left, we have a number divided by itself, which is 1. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. 17 divided by 17 is 1, and so negative 17 divided by itself, negative 17, should also be a positive 1. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we have 80 divided by 5. 80 divided by 5 is 16, and we have a negative divided by a negative, so we have a positive 16. And then finally, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have negative 100 divided by 25. 100 divided by 25 is 4. Negative divided by positive, they are different signs, so our answer is negative. So that's all there really is to multiplying and dividing with negative integers. You do the operation exactly the way that you see it, and then you apply the sign rule at the end. Same signs, your product or quotient is positive. Different signs, your product or quotient is negative.